The rain fell in sheets, blurring the city lights into long, weeping streaks of neon and gold. For Ethan Vance, it was just noise, a monotonous drumming against the bulletproof glass of his chauffeured sedan. He stared out, but he didn't see the glittering towers that bore his name or the bustling streets of a city he practically owned. He saw only the reflection of a man hollowed out by success, a ghost in $1,000 suit. His tie was a noose he hadn't bothered to loosen. Grief was a silent passenger, one that had ridden beside him for 2 long years, ever since Sarah was gone. The silence in the car was heavy, matched only by the silence that awaited him in his cavernous, empty house. Empty, except for the 2 small, sleeping heartbeats that were the only reason he kept breathing. His driver, a stoic man named Arthur, slowed the car for a red light, and that's when Ethan saw her. She was huddled under the flimsy awning of a bus stop, a lone figure against the storm. She wasn't waiting for a bus. The last one had run an hour ago. She was trying to sleep, curled into a tight ball, her thin jacket a useless shield against the biting wind and relentless damp. Her face was turned away, but he could see the exhaustion in the line of her shoulders, a profound weariness that went deeper than a single sleepless night. Something about her stillness, her determined attempt to find rest in a place that offered none, resonated with the deep, unsettled core of him. It was a mirror to his own soul-deep exhaustion. Most people in his position would have seen a problem to be ignored, a piece of urban scenery to lament and then forget. But Ethan saw a person. He saw the frayed edges of a story, the quiet dignity in her posture even as she shivered. He saw something he hadn't felt in himself for a very long time. Resilience. "Arthur, pull over," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. Arthur glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. "Sir?" "Here." "Here," Ethan confirmed. The car glided to the curb. The rain hammered on the roof. For a long moment, Ethan just watched her. He thought of his own warm bed, of the walk-in closet filled with coats he never wore. He thought of his children, Lily and Sam, tucked safely into their beds, oblivious to the cold cruelty of the world outside their window. The injustice of it was a physical ache in his chest. Before he could talk himself out of it, before the cold logic of his world could reassert itself, he opened the door. The cold, wet air was a shock. He walked toward the bus stop, his expensive leather shoes sinking into a puddle. The woman didn't stir until his shadow fell over her. She flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes, wide and startled in the dim light, were the color of moss after a storm. They held a flicker of fear, but beneath it, a defiant spark. She wasn't broken. Bent, yes, but not broken. He shrugged off his heavy wool overcoat. It was warm from his body, absurdly luxurious in this desolate setting. "Here," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He held it out to her. She stared at the coat, then at him, her expression a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. "I don't need your pity," she said, her voice quiet but firm, not cracked or weak as he might have expected. "It's not pity," Ethan replied, and he was surprised to find it was the truth. "It's a coat, and it's raining." He draped it over her shoulders. She was small beneath the heavy fabric, but she didn't shrink away. She simply sat there, enveloped in the scent of cedar and clean linen, the residual warmth a shocking comfort against her cold skin. He should have walked away then. He had done his good deed. He could get back in his warm car and drive away to his empty mansion, feeling marginally better about himself. But he couldn't. He looked at her face, really looked, and saw the faint lines of worry etched around her eyes, the strength in her jaw. He saw a life he couldn't possibly understand, yet he felt an undeniable pull, a sense of shared humanity that transcended the vast chasm between their circumstances. Leaving her here felt fundamentally wrong, an abdication of a responsibility he didn't know he had until this very moment. He took a breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. The words came out before he had fully formed them in his mind, a reckless, insane, and utterly necessary impulse. "Come with me." Her head tilted, her moss-green eyes searching his for a trick, a hidden angle. Why? It was a fair question. He didn't have a logical answer. Not one that would make sense to his board of directors or his skeptical housekeeper. The only answer he had was the truth, as strange as it sounded. Because it's not safe here. And my house has too many empty rooms, he extended a hand. My name is Ethan. She hesitated for a long, rain-soaked moment. Her life had taught her to distrust easy gestures, to see the hook in every offer of bait. But as she looked at his face, she didn't see a predator. She saw a deep, profound sadness in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own. And in his outstretched hand, she saw not a demand, but a simple human invitation. She took it. Her hand was cold, but her grip was firm. I'm Clara, she said. The house was less a home than a museum of a life that had once been happy. Polished marble floors echoed their footsteps, and vast, empty spaces were punctuated by immaculate, soulless furniture. A grand staircase swept upwards into the shadows. Clara, wrapped in Ethan's oversized coat, felt like a ghost haunting someone else's pristine reality. She clutched the worn strap of her single canvas bag, the only thing in the world that was hers, and tried to breathe. A woman with a severe bun and an equally severe expression, whom Ethan introduced as Mrs. Gable, appeared as if from nowhere. Her eyes swept over Clara, taking in the damp hair, the frayed jeans, the borrowed coat, and her disapproval was a palpable force in the room. Ethan ignored it. Please show our guest to the blue room, Mrs. Gable, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. And find her something comfortable to wear. The blue room was larger than any apartment Clara had ever lived in. A four-poster bed was piled high with pillows, and French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking a garden shrouded in darkness and rain. It was beautiful and terrifying. She felt a desperate urge to run, to return to the familiar hardship of the bus stop. Here, she was an imposter, a smudge on a perfect painting. The next morning, the silence of the house was broken by a sudden, frantic patter of small feet. The door to her room burst open and a tiny girl with a wild mane of blonde hair and bright blue eyes, a miniature whirlwind in pink pajamas, skidded to a halt. She was clutching a brown stuffed bear that was missing an eye and had a significant tear in its side, from which stuffing was beginning to escape. "Who are you?" the girl demanded, her voice a high-pitched squeak of pure curiosity. Before Clara could answer, a boy of about 9 appeared in the doorway behind her. He had his father's serious eyes and a guarded expression. "Lily, you're not supposed to bother people," he said, his voice low. "I'm not bothering. I'm investigating," Lily declared. She marched up to Clara, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, and held up the wounded bear. "Barnaby is hurt. Can you fix him?" Clara looked from the hopeful face of the little girl to the skeptical one of the boy. She had spent years mending things. Torn seams, broken promises, her own heart. A torn bear was something she could handle. "I think so," she said softly. "Do you have a needle and thread?" The boy, Sam, remained in the doorway watching. Lily, however, was a force of nature. She ran off and returned moments later with a small sewing kit from Mrs. Gable's laundry room. Clara took the bear, her fingers moving with a gentle, practiced confidence. She didn't just stitch the seam. She reinforced it, her small, even stitches a testament to a lifetime of making do. She found a loose button in the kit, a dark brown one, and carefully sewed it on where the bear's eye had been, giving him a new, slightly rakish look. "He looks like a pirate now," Lily giggled, delighted. She threw her arms around Clara's neck in a fierce, sudden hug. "Thank you." Over Lily's shoulder, Clara saw Sam watching. He didn't smile, but the hard line of his mouth softened almost imperceptibly. He was holding a sketchbook, and she saw a flash of a detailed drawing of a dragon before he snapped it shut. Later that day, Clara found her way to the kitchen. It was a state-of-the-art marvel of stainless steel and granite, but it felt cold and used. She found flour, eggs, sugar. The simple act of measuring and mixing was a comfort, a familiar ritual in a profoundly unfamiliar world. The smell of cinnamon and baking apples soon filled the sterile air, a warm, sweet scent that felt like an act of rebellion. When Ethan came home that evening, he stopped in the hallway. The house smelled different, smelled like home. He followed the scent to the kitchen, where he found Lily sitting at the island, happily munching on a slice of apple cake, while Clara wiped down the counter. Sam was at the far end of the island, his sketchbook open. He wasn't speaking, but he was present, not hiding in his room as he usually was. For the first time in months, the kitchen felt like the heart of the house. Clara looked up, her cheeks slightly flushed from the oven's heat. "I hope you don't mind," she said, her voice uncertain. I needed to do something with my hands." Ethan looked at his children. Lily was chattering about Barnaby the pirate bear. Sam was quietly sketching, occasionally glancing up at Clara. A fragile peace had settled over his chaotic, grieving household. "Mind," Ethan said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "This is the first time Sam has come out of his room before dinner all week." He looked at Clara, at the dusting of flour on her sleeve and the quiet competence in her eyes. "Thank you," in that small, warm kitchen, amidst the scent of apples and the quiet scratching of a boy's pencil. The bond began to form, not with a grand gesture, but with a mended bear and a simple cake. A few days later, the fragile domesticity was nearly shattered. Ethan had been in a rush that morning, a frantic series of calls pulling his attention in a dozen different directions. He'd thrown his suit jacket over a chair in the living room, his wallet in the inner pocket. When he went to retrieve it later that afternoon to pay a landscaper, it was gone. He searched the jacket, patting every pocket twice. Nothing. He checked the chair, the floor, the side table. Nothing. A cold knot of suspicion, ugly and unwelcome, tightened in his stomach. The only thing that had changed in this house was Clara. Mrs. Gable appeared, her lips pursed. "Is something amiss, Mr. Vance?" "I can't find my wallet," he said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. Mrs. Gable's eyes flickered toward the hallway that led to the guest wing. She didn't have to say a word. Her silence was a heavy accusation. "I did mention my concerns, sir." Bringing a stranger into the house with the children, Ethan's jaw tightened. He hated the way his mind immediately went there, the cynical conditioning of a man who dealt with contracts and clauses and the inherent self-interest of others. He wanted to believe better of Clara. He had seen her gentleness with Lily, the quiet way she'd left a new set of charcoal pencils by Sam's sketchbook without a word. But the world he lived in was a harsh one, and trust was a commodity he rarely traded in. He walked through the house, his mind racing. He was about to confront a situation he didn't want to face when he heard voices from the small, sunlit library. He paused outside the door. It was Clara, on her phone, her voice low and strained. "No, Jen, I can't," she was saying. "I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I can't take your money. You have your own family to worry about." "No, it's not about pride. It's about standing on my own 2 feet. I got myself into this, and I have to be the one to get myself out. I'll be fine. I promise." Ethan stood frozen, the words washing over him. He felt a wave of shame so profound it made him dizzy. Here he was, a man of immense wealth, suspecting her of stealing a few $100s, while she was turning down help from a friend, determined to maintain her integrity even when she had nothing. He turned and walked back into the living room, his gaze now methodical, clear of suspicion. He ran his hand down the side of the armchair, deep into the crevice between the cushion and the arm. His fingers brushed against worn leather. He pulled it out. The wallet. It must have slipped from his pocket when he'd tossed the jacket onto the chair. He held it in his hand, the weight of it feeling heavier than before. It wasn't just leather and plastic. It was a symbol of his own failing, his readiness to believe the worst. He walked back to the library. Clara had ended her call and was now just staring out the window, a look of deep worry on her face. He cleared his throat. "Clara." She turned, startled. "Oh, Ethan, I didn't see you there." He held up the wallet. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice quiet. "I misplaced this, and for a moment, I let my cynicism get the better of me."
I'm sorry.
She looked at the wallet, then back at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't get angry or defensive. She simply nodded, a small, sad acknowledgement of the world they both knew, a world that would always judge her first. "It's okay," she said, though they both knew it wasn't. "I understand." But it was in that moment of his quiet confession and her quiet grace that something shifted. He saw her not as a project or a charity case, but as a person of immense, unshakable character. Her integrity was a silent, powerful force. He had tested her without meaning to, and she had passed with a dignity that humbled him to his core. The house continued to thaw. One rainy afternoon, Lily found Clara in the library, a small, leather-bound book open on her lap. It wasn't a printed book. The pages were filled with elegant, looping handwriting and detailed ink drawings of herbs, flowers, and pastries. "What's that?" Lily asked, climbing onto the sofa beside her. "This was my mother's," Clara said, her voice soft with memory. "It's her recipe book. She wrote down everything she ever baked." She pointed to a drawing of a braided loaf of bread. "See? She even drew pictures, so she would remember exactly how to shape them." Clara's backstory unspooled in small, quiet scenes. She told Lily about the small bakery her parents had owned, a warm, fragrant haven called the Rolling Pin. She spoke of waking up to the smell of yeast and sugar, of her father teaching her how to knead dough until it was smooth and elastic, and of her mother letting her paint watercolor designs on the gingerbread cookies at Christmas. The recipe book was more than a collection of instructions. It was the story of her life, a tangible link to the love and warmth she had lost. "We lost the bakery after my dad got sick," she explained simply, her gaze distant. "The medical bills. They took everything. First the savings, then the business, then the house." She didn't cry. Her grief was a quiet, settled thing, a landscape she had been navigating for years. The story was told without a hint of self-pity, just a statement of fact. Ethan stood in the doorway, unseen, listening. He had known her situation was dire, but he hadn't understood the shape of her loss until now. It wasn't just poverty. It was the erasure of a legacy, the loss of a home built not just with bricks, but with love and flour and shared dreams. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, he found Clara in the garden. The rain had stopped, and a pale moon hung in the sky. She was standing by a wildly overgrown rose bush, its thorny branches a tangled mess. "Sarah planted this," Ethan said, his voice startling her. He came to stand beside her. She loved this garden. She had plans for all of it. A vegetable patch over there, a whole bed of lavender here. He gestured vaguely into the darkness. "After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt wrong to change it, but it felt even worse to watch it die." He looked at the tangled rose bush. "Now it's just a mess, a reminder of what I let go." It was the most he had ever spoken of his wife. The wound was still raw, a gaping hole in the center of his life that no amount of success could fill. He was a man who could build corporate empires but couldn't bring himself to prune a rose bush. Clara didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss," instead. She reached out and gently touched one of the thorny stems. "It's not dead," she said softly. "It's just sleeping. Roses are tough. Sometimes they just need a little help to find the sun again." In the quiet darkness of the neglected garden, two solitary people stood together, their separate griefs momentarily touching, creating a fragile bridge of understanding. He had lost a wife and the future he'd imagined. She had lost her parents and the past she cherished. They were both haunted by ghosts, but for the first time in that shared moment of vulnerability, neither of them felt completely alone in the dark. The next morning, Clara was in the garden with a pair of rusty shears she'd found in the shed. She started with the single rose bush, carefully, methodically, trimming away the dead wood, her movements precise and full of purpose. She wasn't trying to erase what had been. She was trying to make space for new growth. Lily came out to help, which mostly involved carrying away the trimmed branches one by one. Then Sam appeared, watching from a distance. Clara didn't push him. She simply started clearing a small, sun-drenched patch of earth, turning the soil over with a trowel. "This would be a good spot for tomatoes," she said to no one in particular. A few minutes later, Sam was beside her, a small spade in his hand, silently digging. The garden became their project. Ethan came home one day to find 3 small mounds of freshly turned earth, where Clara and the children had planted tomato, cucumber, and basil seedlings. The sight of his withdrawn son working alongside his boisterous daughter, both of them streaked with dirt and fully engaged, was a more beautiful sight than any corporate merger he had ever orchestrated. The transformation spread from the garden into the house. Armed with her mother's recipe book, Clara began to bake. The sterile kitchen was filled with the scent of rosemary bread, lemon tarts, and chocolate chip cookies. It was no longer a showpiece. It was a functioning, creative space. Laughter, a sound that had become achingly rare, started to echo in the marble hallways again. Ethan found himself leaving the office at 5 o'clock, then 4:30, pulled home by an invisible thread, a desire to be part of the warmth that was blooming within his own walls. Clara, in turn, began to heal. The constant anxiety that had been her companion on the streets started to recede. She had a purpose beyond mere survival. She was mending more than a garden. She was nurturing a family, and in doing so, she was nurturing the forgotten parts of herself. She sketched new recipes in the back of her mother's book, her own legacy beginning to intertwine with the one she had inherited. They became a unit, a strange and wonderful constellation. They had movie nights, curled up on the massive sofa with bowls of popcorn. They worked on jigsaw puzzles on the dining room table that had previously only been used for board meetings. Ethan taught Clara how to play chess. She taught him the simple, profound joy of baking bread from scratch. He saw his children flourish under her gentle, steady presence. Lily's chaotic energy was channeled into creative projects, and Sam's silent anger began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet confidence. He even started showing his drawings to Clara, intricate worlds filled with heroes and monsters. One Saturday, Ethan made an impulsive decision. "Let's go on a picnic," he announced. The idea was met with enthusiastic cheers from Lily and a rare, genuine smile from Sam. They packed a simple lunch of sandwiches Clara had made on her fresh bread and a thermos of lemonade. They didn't go to a fancy resort or a private club. They went to a public park, the same one Ethan and Sarah used to take the children to. They spread a blanket under a large oak tree. For a few hours, they were just a normal family. Ethan pushed Lily on the swings. He threw a frisbee with Sam. He and Clara sat on the blanket, watching them, a comfortable silence settling between them. The sun was warm on their faces. For the first time, Ethan felt the crushing weight on his chest lift entirely. He looked at Clara, her face relaxed and happy as she watched the children play, and he felt a surge of profound gratitude and something more, something he wasn't ready to name. He thought, this is what happiness feels like. It was simple, it was real, and he never wanted it to end. The happiness was a fragile bubble, and it was about to burst. Unseen, from behind a row of bushes, a photographer with a long-lens camera was documenting their idyllic afternoon. He wasn't interested in a story about healing or found family. He was interested in a scandal. The next morning, the photo was on the front page of a notorious gossip website. It was a candid shot, capturing a moment when Ethan was smiling at Clara, his expression open and warm. The headline was crude and sensational. Grieving billionaire Ethan Vance replaces late wife with mystery homeless woman. The article was a brutal tapestry of half-truths and cruel innuendo. It painted Ethan as a callous tycoon and Clara as a manipulative opportunist who had latched onto a vulnerable, wealthy man. It mentioned her sleeping at a bus stop, framing her poverty not as a misfortune but as a character flaw. The story spread like wildfire through the digital world. Ethan's phone began to ring incessantly. First, it was his PR team in full crisis mode. Then, it was the members of the board for the Vance Foundation, the charitable organization he had founded in Sarah's name to fund shelters and educational programs. Their biggest fundraising gala was in 2 weeks. "Ethan, this is a disaster," said Harold Kensington, the chairman of the board, his voice tight with panic. "Our donors are conservative. They're reading this story, and they're seeing a scandal. They're threatening to pull their pledges. We're talking millions of dollars, Ethan. The optics are just terrible." The word optics hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. They weren't talking about Clara as a person. They were talking about her as a public relations problem, a variable in a financial equation. He sat in his home office, the offending article glowing on his screen, and felt the walls closing in. The warmth that had filled his house for the past few weeks evaporated, replaced by the cold, familiar chill of crisis management. He thought of his children. Sam was old enough to use the internet. What if he saw this? What if kids at school saw it? He imagined them having to defend their father, having to answer questions about the strange woman living in their house. He had brought her in to create a safe haven for them, and instead, he had exposed them to the ugliest parts of his public life. That evening, the house was silent and tense. Clara knew something was wrong. She had seen the way Ethan looked at his phone, the hard, stressed line of his jaw. She had a sinking feeling she was the cause. He found her in the kitchen, packing away the leftovers from a dinner no one had eaten. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Clara, we need to talk," he began, his voice strained. He laid it all out, the article, the board, the donors, the potential damage to the foundation that was his wife's legacy. He tried to explain it logically, as a business problem that required a difficult solution. But with every word, he felt like a traitor. "The foundation helps hundreds of people," he said, his voice pleading for her to understand. "It keeps shelters open. I can't let that fall apart." He finally looked at her, and the quiet pain in her eyes was more devastating than any accusation. She wasn't angry. She just looked defeated. The spark he had first seen at the bus stop was gone, extinguished by the harsh reality of his world. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. This was the moment of his greatest failure. He chose fear over faith. He chose optics over authenticity. I think it would be best if you weren't here for a while," he stammered, hating the words as they came out of his mouth. "Just until this blows over. I can get you an apartment, a nice one. I'll give you enough money so you'll never have to worry again. Anything you need." He was offering her a transaction, a severance package for services rendered. He was trying to solve a human problem with money, the only tool he truly trusted. Clara said nothing for a long moment. She simply took off the apron she was wearing and folded it neatly on the counter. She looked around the warm kitchen, at the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, at the pot of basil growing on the windowsill. Then she looked at him. "I don't want your money, Ethan," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its strength. "I never did." She walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to the blue room. She packed her few belongings into her worn canvas bag. She paused, looking at the pirate bear, Barnaby, sitting on the perfectly made bed. With a trembling hand, she picked him up and tucked him under her arm. She walked back down the stairs, past a stunned Ethan, and out the front door, back into the cold, uncertain world she had come from. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that rushed in to fill the space was suffocating, a terrible, profound emptiness. The house was a tomb. The silence Ethan had once craved now mocked him at every turn. The smell of cinnamon and apples was gone, replaced by the sterile scent of lemon polish. Mrs. Gable moved through the rooms with grim efficiency, restoring the house to its former state of museum-like perfection, erasing every trace that Clara had ever been there. But her presence lingered, a phantom limb the entire family could feel. Lily was inconsolable. She refused to eat, wandering the house clutching a pillow, wailing for Clara and for her pirate bear. Ethan tried to explain that Clara had to go away for a little while, but the empty platitudes of an adult meant nothing to the raw grief of a 6-year-old. Sam's reaction was quieter but far more cutting. He retreated back into his shell, The silence he exuded now laced with a bitter, simmering anger. The day after Clara left, Ethan found a piece of paper slipped under his office door. It was one of Sam's drawings. It depicted 4 figures: a tall man, a small girl, a slightly smaller boy, and a woman with kind eyes. They were all holding hands in the garden, under a brightly shining sun. At the bottom of the page, in Sam's shaky, furious scrawl, were 3 words: "You broke it." The drawing was a dagger to Ethan's heart. He stared at it for an hour, the simple, powerful accusation of his son echoing the truth he had been trying to deny. He hadn't just protected his foundation. He had betrayed his family. He had traded real, tangible happiness for the approval of faceless donors and the fleeting judgment of the public. He had looked at Clara, a woman of more integrity and strength than anyone on his board, and had valued her less than a line item on a balance sheet. He had broken it. He had broken them. The realization settled over him not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. His wife, Sarah, had built the foundation to help people, to offer a hand to those who had fallen. She would have been ashamed of him. She would have seen Clara's worth in an instant. In his attempt to protect Sarah's legacy, he had desecrated its very spirit. The next morning, he walked into his office with a new, steely resolve. He bypassed his PR team and called an emergency meeting of the foundation's board. They gathered in the polished mahogany boardroom, their faces a mixture of concern and relief, assuming he had come to his senses and would announce a damage control plan. Ethan stood at the head of the table. He was calm, his voice steady. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "Good morning," he began. "I've called you all here to discuss the future of this foundation. And to discuss the nature of character." He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. "For the last 48 hours, this board has been consumed with a public relations issue. With optics. We have been worried about what people will think. We have been worried about money." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "This foundation is named for my late wife, Sarah. She started it because she believed that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, deserves dignity, respect, and a second chance. We have mission statements carved into plaques in the lobby that say as much. It seems we have forgotten to read them lately." He held up his phone, displaying the cruel article for all to see. "This story is filled with lies and innuendo, but it contains one truth. The woman they are slandering, Clara, was homeless. She had lost everything. And in the past few weeks, she has brought more warmth, kindness, and healing into my home than I have known in 2 years. She mended my children's hearts. She began to mend mine." His voice was thick with emotion, but he pushed on. "She is a person of profound integrity and quiet strength. And I, in a moment of cowardice, asked her to leave my home because I was afraid of what people like you would think.
It shows optics over humanity.
I failed her. I failed my children. And I failed the memory of my wife." He looked directly at Harold Kensington. "The Vance Foundation was built to help people who have lost their way. Clara is one of those people. If you cannot see the profound, living embodiment of our mission in her, if all you can see is a liability, then you have no place here. This foundation will stand for something more than a positive public image. It will stand for people. If any donors wish to pull their funding over this, they are free to do so. We will rebuild with people who understand what we are truly about. As of this moment, my priority is not the gala. It is finding Clara and asking her to forgive me." He placed his hands on the table. "You can stand with me, or you can tender your resignations. The choice is yours." He turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a stunned and silent board in his wake. He had finally made a stand, not for his company, but for his values. Now, he just had to find the woman he had so terribly wronged. Finding Clara was harder than he expected. She hadn't gone to a shelter he could easily track through the foundation's network. She had simply vanished. He was consumed by a cold, rising panic. He had thrown her back into a world that had already tried to crush her once. His breakthrough came from an unlikely source. He remembered the phone call he had overheard, the friend named Jen she had spoken to. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional he used for corporate matters, and gave him only a first name and a general description. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. 2 agonizing days later, the investigator called. He had found her. Jen was a former co-worker from the bakery. She had taken Clara in for a night, but Clara, unwilling to be a burden, had insisted on moving to a women's shelter across town. A small, underfunded place that wasn't on the Vance Foundation's official donor list. Ethan drove there himself, Arthur left behind. He clutched Sam's drawing in his hand, the paper now crumpled from how many times he had folded and unfolded it. The shelter was a modest brick building in a neighborhood far from his own gilded world. He walked inside, his expensive suit feeling like a costume. The common room was clean but worn, filled with women talking quietly, reading, or just staring into space. And then he saw her. She was sitting in a corner armchair, a sketchbook on her lap. She was drawing, her focus absolute. She looked thinner, the lines of worry back around her eyes, but she was still there. That same resilient core was still intact. He walked toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't have a grand speech prepared. All the clever words he used to sway investors and command boardrooms felt useless now. He just stood in front of her chair, waiting. After a moment, she seemed to sense his presence and looked up. Her eyes widened in shock, a dozen emotions flitting across her face. Surprise, hurt, anger, and a flicker of something else. Something he hoped was not entirely lost. He couldn't speak. Instead, he held out the crumpled drawing Sam had made of their family. "He's right," Ethan said, his voice thick and raw. "I broke it. I was a coward. I listened to the wrong people and I broke the best thing that has happened to my family in years. I am so sorry, Clara. For everything." He took a shaky breath. "Please," he whispered, the word a desperate plea. "Come home." He used the word home. Not my house, the distinction was everything. Clara stared at the drawing, at the 4 little figures holding hands in the sun. Tears welled in her eyes, tears she had refused to shed when she'd left his house. She saw the deep, genuine remorse in Ethan's face, the exhaustion of a man who had fought the wrong battle and finally understood what was truly at stake. Before she could answer, the doors of the shelter burst open, and Lily, who had refused to stay in the car, came running in. "Clara!" she cried, launching herself into Clara's arms. In her hand, she was clutching a small, familiar object. It was Barnaby the pirate bear. Clara had left him behind on Lily's pillow. "You forgot Barnaby?" Lily sobbed into her shoulder. "We need you. Barnaby needs you." Sam was standing in the doorway behind his sister, his hands shoved in his pockets, trying to look indifferent. But his eyes were fixed on Clara, and they were shining with unshed tears. Clara hugged Lily tightly, burying her face in the little girl's hair. She looked over Lily's head at Ethan, who stood there, vulnerable and waiting, his entire heart in his eyes. He wasn't offering her money or a place to stay. He was offering her a family. He was offering her a home. She nodded slowly, the tears finally falling freely down her cheeks. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The return to the house was different. It wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a homecoming. The relationship that had grown organically, in quiet moments, was now one of conscious choice. The scandal didn't just disappear. The gossip sites buzzed for a few more days, but Ethan ignored it all. He had made his stand. Several board members resigned, but others, moved by his speech, doubled down on their commitment. New donors, inspired by the story of a foundation that practiced what it preached, began to emerge. The crisis, it turned out, had been a cleansing fire. Clara, however, was changed by the experience. Her time back in the shelter, however brief, had reminded her of the countless other women whose stories were just like hers. Women who had been knocked down by life and were struggling to get back up. She knew that charity, while essential, wasn't always enough. What people needed was an opportunity, a skill, a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as she and Ethan sat in the kitchen after the children were asleep, She spread her mother's recipe book out on the table. "This book, this is all I have left of my family," she began, tracing the faded ink with her finger. "But it's not just recipes. It's a trade. It's a skill. It's what gave my parents a life." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with an idea. What if the foundation did more than just provide a bed for the night? What if we could give women a skill they could use to build a new life? A real, sustainable career. Ethan listened, captivated. "I know how to run a kitchen," Clara continued, her voice gaining passion and confidence. "I know how to bake, how to manage inventory, how to create a menu. There are so many women in those shelters who are smart and capable, but they've lost their confidence. What if we created a culinary training program, a professional kitchen, run through the foundation, where we could teach them everything from basic knife skills to advanced pastry techniques? We could partner with local restaurants for job placements. We could give them a craft, a community, and a way to stand on their own 2 feet. The idea was brilliant. It was practical, powerful, and deeply personal. It combined her lived experience and practical knowledge with his resources and business acumen. It wasn't his mission or her mission. It became their mission. They spent the next few weeks working side by side, late into the night. They drafted a proposal, designed a curriculum, and scouted locations. Ethan watched in awe as Clara commanded the project, her quiet nature transforming into a focused, determined leadership. She knew exactly what was needed, from the type of industrial mixers they would have to buy to the kind of counseling support the women would require. He handled the logistics and the funding. She provided the heart and the soul. They were a team, their partnership now forged not just in affection, but in a shared purpose that was bigger than both of them. The project, which they named the Rolling Pin Initiative in honor of her parents' bakery, became the new, solid foundation of their life together. Months passed. The Rolling Pin Initiative was a resounding success. Its first class of graduates were all placed in jobs, their lives irrevocably changed. The Vance house was no longer a silent mansion. It was a home, constantly filled with the scent of experimental baking, the sound of the children's laughter, and the quiet hum of 2 people building a life together. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of color and life, a testament to the care it had been given. One cool autumn evening, Ethan found Clara in the garden, wrapping burlap around the rose bushes to protect them from the coming frost. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The lights of the house cast a warm, golden glow behind her. The children were asleep inside, safe and happy. He stood watching her for a moment, this incredible woman who had walked into his life out of a storm and taught him how to live again. She had rebuilt his family, given him a renewed purpose, and shown him what true strength looked like. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not live without her. He walked over to her. He didn't have a velvet box or a grand speech. Their life wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the quiet, daily acts of love and partnership. He took the burlap from her hands and set it aside, taking her dirt-smudged hands in his. "My whole life has been about building things," he said, his voice low and steady. "Companies, foundations, a portfolio. Big, empty things, I've realized. But this," he gestured with his head toward the warm, lit house, toward the life they had made within its walls. "This is the only thing I'm truly afraid to lose." He looked into her moss-green eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with such weary defiance at a bus stop. "Everything we have, everything that matters, was built on one question I asked you in the rain. I have another one for you now." He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out a massive diamond. He pulled out a simple, unadorned platinum band. It was elegant, strong, and timeless, just like her. He didn't get down on one knee. He simply stood before her, as her partner, her equal. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "Clara," he said, his voice full of a quiet, unshakable love, "will you build the rest of your life with me?" Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were tears of pure joy. She threw her arms around his neck and nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," she finally whispered into his shoulder. Yes. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms as the last of the sunlight faded, the quiet promise of a shared future stretching out before them. True wealth is never measured in dollars, but in the richness of the human heart. It's found not in status or circumstance, but in the quiet integrity of our character. Sometimes the greatest investments we can make are the small, unexpected acts of kindness, the decision to see the person instead of the problem. For in reaching out a hand to someone else, we often find the very thing we needed to save ourselves. What door could you open for someone today?